I collapsed during a board meeting and woke up in a hospital bed with a mass near my pancreas. When the doctor warned that I might have 4 days left, my daughter squeezed my hand and whispered, "4 more days, and the company, the mansion, and the $8 million insurance policy will be ours." My son-in-law smirked. "And the car is mine." They thought the medication had knocked me unconscious. I heard everything. The moment the door closed, I called the man who had served my family for 30 years. They think I'm dying. Help me make them regret believing it. If you're still here, thank you. That means everything to me on Dad Family Revenge. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from. Your city, your state, your country. I read every single one. A note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Names and places are coincidental, but the lesson inside is worth carrying with you. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the ceiling. White acoustic tiles perfectly gridded with a fluorescent light humming directly above me. I had stared at a lot of ceilings in my 65 years. The water-stained ceiling of my first office on Figueroa Street, when Callaway Construction was nothing more than 2 trucks and a borrowed prayer, the vaulted cedar ceiling of the house Helen and I built together in Bel Air. But I had never stared at a ceiling like this one, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, with machines beeping in steady, indifferent intervals beside my head. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was. The conference room, 22nd floor. I had been walking Calvin through the quarterly projections when the room tilted sideways. I remembered reaching for the back of a chair and missing it. I remembered the carpet coming up fast. After that, nothing, until these white tiles and the green peaks of a heart monitor climbing the screen beside my bed. Cedar's Sinai Medical Center. The private room had a window facing west. Through it, I could see the last of the afternoon sun laying itself flat across the Los Angeles skyline, Wilshire Century City, the faint gray line of the Pacific somewhere beyond. An IV line ran into my left arm. My Navy suit jacket, the one Helen had chosen for my 60th birthday, because she said Navy was the color of a man who had earned his authority, hung over the chair near the door. My cell phone was still in the inside pocket. I could see the rectangular shape pressing against the fabric. Nobody had taken it. When your company's driver calls for help and rides with you, certain things get overlooked. Diana was in the chair closest to my bed. Charcoal blazer, dark hair pulled back, the composed presentation she wore when she wanted a room to believe she was in control. She had my right hand wrapped between both of hers. Her palms were warm, or maybe mine were just cold. Marcus stood near the window with his hands in his pockets. He was checking his watch. I caught the flick of his wrist from beneath my half-closed eyes. Then again, 40 seconds later. Then a third time before Dr. Whitfield walked in. 3 times in under 2 minutes. I had spent 40 years building a company by paying close attention to what people did when they believed nobody was watching. Marcus Webb had never understood that about me. Dr. James Whitfield arrived at 4:15. Tall, silver-framed glasses, the careful, measured walk of a man who had delivered difficult news many times and had learned to carry it without spilling any. He shook Diana's hand first, looked toward Marcus, then settled on me. "Mr. Callaway, I'm glad you're awake. How are you feeling?" "Like I missed a step on a very long staircase," I said. He sat at the foot of my bed and set his tablet on his knee. "The CT scan showed findings we need to discuss. There's an abnormal mass near your pancreas and a significant infection in the surrounding tissue. We need a biopsy before we draw conclusions. But given the imaging and the rate of the infection's spread, I want to be direct with you. If this mass is what we're most concerned, it may be your condition could deteriorate quickly." "How quickly?" Diana asked. Her voice was clear and controlled, the boardroom voice, the voice she used when she wanted to steer a conversation without appearing to steer it. Dr. Whitfield paused the way doctors pause when they are choosing which truth you can handle. In a worst-case scenario, 4 days is within the range of possibility. Diana nodded slowly. The way she nodded when she was filing information away. I felt something shift in the room. Not the temperature, not the light. Something in the air pressure, something that moved against my skin, the way the atmosphere shifts before a storm arrives and the birds go quiet. Diana had not asked whether the mass was treatable. She had not asked about specialists, about next steps, about the biopsy process. She had asked about 4 days. Dr. Whitfield stayed another 10 minutes. Diana's follow-up questions were precise and oriented entirely toward logistics. When he left the room, felt smaller than before. Diana smoothed the blanket across my legs, leaned close. Her perfume cut through the antiseptic. Her expression arranged itself into something soft and sorrowful, the way a stage is arranged before the curtain rises. "Rest now, Dad," she said. "We'll take care of everything." She thought the medications had taken me somewhere far away. She had watched the monitor flatten into longer, slower rhythms. She had made a calculation about what I could and couldn't hear. She was wrong. My mind was sharp as a survey line. Every word registered. Every movement Marcus made near the window registered. The quick, barely perceptible nod he gave Diana over my bed, the nod of two people confirming something they had already decided, registered most clearly of all. I kept my breathing slow. My hand lay still beneath hers. I thought about Helen and how differently she had held this same hand in hospital rooms. I thought about the Mustang in the garage, midnight blue cream leather seats Helen had chosen because she said they looked happier than black. I had not started that engine in 12 years. I lay still. I breathed. I waited. And I began to plan. They waited until the night nurse finished her 8 o'clock rounds before they said anything real. I heard the squeak of rubber-soled shoes fade down the hallway. I heard the door settle back into its frame. And then I heard Diana exhale long, slow, and satisfied, the way a person exhales when they have been holding something in for a very long time and have finally decided they no longer need to. 4 days, she said softly. She was standing close to my bed, close enough that I could smell her perfume again. I honestly thought it would take longer. My chest seized like someone had reached inside and made a fist around my heart. I kept my breathing slow. I kept my face still. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to open my eyes, to sit up, to demand an explanation. I overruled every single one of them. "The insurance policy alone is $8 million, Marcus said from near the window. His voice was low, but not low enough. It never was. "That covers the debt and leaves plenty to restructure. We don't touch the insurance until everything is properly transferred," Diana said, and her tone had shifted. The soft grief she performed for Dr. Whitfield was completely gone. What replaced it was crisp and efficient and cold as a balance sheet. The trust, the business accounts, the property titles, in that order. What about the car? What about it? The Mustang. Marcus moved closer to the bed. I could feel the slight shift in air pressure as he approached. Classic like that '69 fastback midnight blue, there are collectors who'd pay serious money. I already know a guy in Scottsdale. Something tore open inside me then. Not grief exactly. Something older and sharper than grief. Helen had picked that car out of a classified ad in the Los Angeles Times on a Tuesday morning in 1974. She had circled it in red ink and left it on my pillow. We had driven to Van Nuys together in my work truck to look at it, and she had sat behind the wheel and grinned so wide I forgot entirely that we couldn't really afford it. We bought it anyway. We always said it was our first act of completely irrational love. Marcus wanted to sell it to a collector in Scottsdale. "We'll deal with the car after," Diana said. "Right now I need you focused. The attorney paperwork has to be ready before he gets any worse. We can't afford delays." "He's not going to wake up and argue about it, Diana. You don't know that." Her voice dropped to something nearly inaudible. "Just be ready." Their footsteps moved toward the door together. I listened to the sound of them leaving the soft mechanical click of the latch. The muffled conversation that continued briefly in the hallway, then faded toward the elevator bank at the end of the corridor. The room settled into the hum of the monitor and the distant sounds of the hospital at night. A cart rolling somewhere, a call button chiming, a television murmuring through a wall. I opened my eyes. The ceiling tiles looked exactly the same as they had 4 hours ago. White, gridded, indifferent. I lay there for a moment and let myself feel the full weight of what I had just heard. My daughter. 38 years old. I had taught her to ride a bicycle in the driveway of our first house in Pasadena. I had sat in the front row at her college graduation, with tears running down my face that I didn't bother wiping away because Helen was crying too, and neither of us cared who saw. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and held it there until the tightness in my throat passed. Then I reached across to the chair beside the bed, slid my hand into the inside pocket of my navy suit jacket, and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up in the darkness of the room. I scrolled to a name I had called 10,000 times over 30 years, a name that had never once let me down. Raymond Cole. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Calloway." His voice was graveled and immediate, the voice of a man who had been awake and waiting without knowing he was waiting. "Tell me where you are." My throat tightened again. I swallowed hard against it. "Cedars-Sinai," I said. "Room 614. Raymond." My voice cracked on his name just slightly, just enough to betray the 65-year-old man lying alone in a hospital bed in the dark. "I need you. Come now." "I'm already putting on my jacket," he said, and the line stayed open, neither of us speaking, just the sound of his footsteps moving across a floor somewhere in Bel Air until I was ready to tell him everything. Raymond Cole walked into room 614 at Cedars-Sinai at 10:47 in the evening, and the first thing he did was look at me the way a man looks at something he is afraid might break if he moves too fast. He was wearing his old brown canvas jacket, the one with the frayed left cuff he had refused to throw away for 11 years, and his work boots still had dried dirt along the soles from the garden. He was carrying a paper cup of coffee from the vending machine in the lobby, and he held it out to me like a man offering the only thing he had. "You look terrible," he said. Something loosened in my chest that had been wound tight since 4 o'clock that afternoon. My eyes burned and I pressed my lips together hard before I trusted myself to speak. "Sit down, Raymond," I said, and closed the door. He sat. He wrapped both hands around his own coffee cup and watched me with dark, steady eyes that had seen 30 years of early mornings and hard work, and one funeral that nearly broke us both. He did not rush me. He did not fill the space with noise. Raymond Cole had always understood that some things needed to arrive in their own time. I told him everything. I told him about the CT scan and Dr. Whitfield's careful, devastating words. I told him about Diana's hand around mine and how cold it had felt despite being warm. I told him about Marcus checking his watch 3 times in 2 minutes, and about the exhale Diana released when the night nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, that long, satisfied exhale that I would hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. I told him about the insurance policy, about the trust, and the property titles, about a collector in Scottsdale who was apparently already waiting for a call about Helen's Mustang. By the time I finished, Raymond's jaw was set so hard I could see the muscle working beneath his cheek. His coffee cup was crushed slightly at one side from the pressure of his grip. He stared at the floor for a long moment, and when he looked back up at me, his eyes were wet, not spilling over, but wet, the way a man's eyes get when he is furious and heartbroken at the same time and refuses to choose between the two. "Tell me what you need," he said. His voice came out rough and low. "3 things." I held up my fingers one at a time because my hand was shaking, and I needed something to do with it. "The financial files in the safe. Patricia Norris, call her tonight, it doesn't matter what time. And the security camera footage from the house. All of it. Going back 60 days. Raymond nodded once at each item, committing them to memory, the way he had always committed everything completely, without writing anything down, without asking me to repeat myself. "Diana has a key to the front door," I said. "I'll go through the kitchen entrance." He stood and pulled his jacket straight. "She doesn't know I changed the code on that door last spring. You asked me to update all the secondary entries, and I never mentioned it to her." I felt a wave of something move through me that was equal parts relief and grief. "Raymond." My throat tightened around his name. "If any of this is what I think it is, then we'll deal with it," he said firmly. "You focus on staying in that bed and letting the doctors do what they're paid to do. I'll handle the rest." He was almost at the door when I said his name again. He stopped. 30 years, I said. "I never once told you what that meant to me." Raymond turned around. His expression did something complicated, a tightening around the eyes, a press of the lips, and for a moment he looked exactly like the young man of 32 who had shown up at my first job site in East Los Angeles with a broken-down truck and an application he'd filled out in the parking lot. "You don't have to tell me," he said quietly. "I already know. Now get some rest, Mr. Calloway. I'll call you from the house." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft final click. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling and tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. Outside the window, Los Angeles glittered in the dark. 10 million lights spread across the basin from the Hollywood Hills to the Pacific, indifferent and blazing and relentless. Somewhere out there in Bel Air, the house Helen and I had built together sat quiet and waiting, and Raymond Cole was driving toward it through the October night, with his jaw set and his hands steady on the wheel. My phone buzzed 40 minutes later. Raymond's name on the screen. I answered before the second vibration finished. "I'm in the office," he said. His voice was different now, careful, deliberate, the voice he used when he was choosing his words, the way you choose your footing on uncertain ground. "Arthur, the safe lock has fresh scratches on it. Someone tried to open this recently, more than once." The blood in my veins went cold. "And Diana's laptop," he continued. "She left it on the desk. It's open. There's an email folder that hasn't been fully deleted." A pause. "The oldest message in it is dated 6 months ago." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. "Raymond," I said, "don't touch anything. Take photographs of everything and then call Patricia Norris." "Already dialing," he said. Patricia Norris answered Raymond's call on the first ring. She told me this herself when she arrived at Cedars-Sinai the next morning, pulling off her coat and dropping her briefcase on the visitor chair, with the focused efficiency of a woman who had been awake since before sunrise and had no intention of pretending otherwise. Patricia was 58 years old, with silver-streaked hair. She kept cut short and sharp, and eyes that had a way of making you feel she had already read the last page of whatever story you were about to tell her. "Raymond called me at 5:05 in the morning," she said, settling into the chair and opening her laptop on her knees. I was at the office by 6. I've been working for 4 hours, and I need you to listen carefully, Arthur, because what I'm about to tell you is worse than you think. My stomach dropped. I pushed myself up against the pillows and tried to ignore the pull of the IV line in my arm. "Talk to me," I said. Patricia turned the laptop so I could see the screen. Raymond had photographed every email in Diana's folder, 41 messages in total spanning 6 months, between Diana's personal account and an address I didn't recognize. "That second address belongs to a private legal consultant Diana hired outside your family attorney," Patricia said. "Someone who specializes in elder financial law. Specifically," she tapped the screen, "in conservatorship proceedings." I felt the word land in my chest like something physical. "Conservatorship," I repeated. "In California, a conservatorship allows one person to take legal control over another person's finances and personal decisions when a court determines that person can no longer manage their own affairs." Patricia said, her voice precise and steady. "It requires medical documentation of cognitive decline. Arthur, Diana began building that documentation 6 weeks ago, before you ever set foot in this hospital." My hands gripped the blanket so hard the fabric bunched between my fingers. "She filed false medical records. She commissioned them from a private physician willing to document what she described as your increasing forgetfulness, your confusion during meetings, your difficulty managing complex decisions." Patricia's jaw tightened. "I've already pulled the name. The physician's license is currently under review by the California Medical Board for 2 separate complaints. Diana found exactly the right person." The room felt like it was tilting. I thought about the board meeting 3 months ago, where I had paused mid-sentence trying to remember a contractor's name. Diana had touched my arm and said gently in front of 6 people, "Dad, it's okay. Take your time." I had thought she was being kind. "There's more," Patricia said. "Tell me." "The emails also reference a timeline." She scrolled down. Diana and her consultant mapped out a 4-stage process. Stage 1, medical documentation. Stage 2, filing for emergency conservatorship the moment you became incapacitated. Stage 3, transferring business authority to Marcus within 30 days of the conservatorship being granted. Stage 4, liquidating non-essential assets. Patricia looked up at me over the top of her glasses. "The Mustang is listed by name Arthur, along with 2 of your investment properties in Pasadena." Something hot and sharp moved behind my eyes. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth and breathed through my nose until it passed. "How long has Marcus been involved?" I asked. "From the beginning. Every stage references him." Patricia closed the laptop. "This wasn't Diana reacting to a crisis, Arthur. This was Diana creating the conditions for one and then waiting for the right moment. Your collapse in that conference room, she didn't cause it, but she was ready for it." The monitor beside my bed registered my heart rate climbing. I stared at the window and watched a red-tailed hawk circle something invisible above the parking structure across the street, riding the warm October thermals with complete indifference to everything happening in room 614. "I've already taken steps," Patricia said. "I contacted Dr. Whitfield's office this morning and formally requested that your medical record reflect clearly and in legally defensible language that you are fully alert, fully oriented, and in complete possession of your decision-making capacity. That documentation now exists in your file. Any conservatorship petition Diana files will run directly into it." I exhaled a long, shaking breath that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Patricia," my voice came out rougher than I intended, "I need you to understand something. I built that company from nothing. Helen and I, we gave 40 years to it. Every contractor we ever paid on time, every employee we ever promoted, every building that still stands in this city with our name on the permit, that's 40 years of our lives. Patricia's expression shifted into something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite anger, but lived somewhere between the two. I know, she said quietly. I will not let them take it. My voice cracked on the last word, despite everything I did to prevent it. My eyes burned, and I pressed them shut for a moment, hard, until I was sure of myself again. Whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, tell me where we start. Patricia reached into her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. She clicked her pen with the decisive snap of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this instruction. We start, she said, by making sure every door they think is open is actually a wall. She paused, then looked up at me with something steady and fierce in her eyes. But first, there's one more thing in those emails, Arthur. Something I need you to hear before we go any further. My throat tightened. Tell me, Diana filed the first false document 14 months ago. Not 6 weeks. Not 6 months. Patricia held my gaze. 14 months ago, 3 months before she ever asked you to give her operational control of the company. The hawk outside the window banked left and disappeared behind the edge of the building. The monitor beeped. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart rolled past with a sound like distant thunder. I sat with that number 14 and felt everything I thought I understood about the last year rearrange itself into a shape I didn't recognize. Calvin Merritt had been running the daily operations of Callaway Construction for 25 years, and in that time he had developed what Helen used to call his wrong weather instinct, a particular tightening behind his sternum that arrived without warning whenever something was about to go badly sideways. He told me later that the instinct had been firing for 3 weeks before I collapsed in the conference room. He just hadn't known what to do with it yet. I heard the full story that Tuesday afternoon when Calvin came to Cedars-Sinai, directly from the office, still wearing his work clothes. Dark slacks, the blue Callaway Construction polo he'd had for so long, the logo on the chest had started to fade. He sat in the same chair Patricia had occupied that morning and turned his hard hat slowly in his hands, the way Raymond turned his coffee cup. And I thought about how the people who actually build things always need something to do with their hands when they're delivering bad news. 3 weeks ago, Calvin said, his voice tight and controlled, Marcus asked me for the direct contact information of our top 6 clients, not through the company system. He called my personal cell and asked me to text them to him privately. Calvin's jaw worked. He said Diana had asked him to reach out informally, strengthen relationships. I thought it was unusual, but I didn't want to overstep. You didn't know, I said. I should have known. His knuckles went white around the hard hat brim. Last Thursday, I ran a routine check on our client communication logs, something I do every month, and I found gaps. Emails that should have been in the system weren't there. 3 of our largest accounts, Meridian Properties, Westside Pacific, and the Glendale School District contract, showed no outbound correspondence for the past 2 months. He looked up at me and the pain in his face was raw and unguarded. So I pulled Marcus's company email. What I found made me sick to my stomach, Arthur. I held very still. Outside my window, the afternoon sun was dropping toward the Santa Monica Mountains, painting the smog in shades of amber and copper. Beautiful and toxic, the way Los Angeles always managed to be. He's been contacting our clients directly, Calvin said, under a separate company name. Webb Development Solutions registered in California 4 months ago. Marcus Webb listed as sole proprietor. He's been offering them the same services at a 5% discount, telling them Callaway Construction is going through a leadership transition and they'd be better served by a smaller, more agile firm. Calvin's voice broke slightly on the last words, then steadied itself. Arthur Meridian Properties has already signed a letter of intent. $240,000 of annual contract revenue. Gone. The tightness in my chest that had been there since Monday afternoon sharpened into something acute and specific. 25 years ago, I had personally flown to San Diego to pitch Meridian Properties over a lunch that lasted 4 hours. Helen had stayed up until midnight, helping me rehearse the presentation on our living room couch. Calvin, I kept my voice even with considerable effort. Did you take copies? Every email, every letter of intent, every registration document for Web Development Solutions. He reached into the inside pocket of his polo and produced a folded USB drive, which he set on the bedside table between us, with the careful deliberateness of a man placing evidence at a crime scene. I also cross-referenced the company bank records Marcus has access to. Arthur money has been moving out of the Callaway operating account in increments small enough to avoid automatic flagging. 11 transactions over 14 weeks. Total outflow. Calvin stopped, swallowed. His eyes went bright with something that looked very much like the anger of a man who has given the best years of his working life to something and watched someone try to hollow it out from the inside. $312,000. The number hit me like a fist. Calvin, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, rougher than I wanted it to. Why did you come to me directly? You could have gone to Diana. She's still listed as CEO. Calvin looked at me for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, because every transfer I traced had Diana's secondary authorization code on it. The monitor beside my bed beeped steadily into the space between us. I called Patricia Norris an hour ago, Calvin continued. I didn't know who else to call. I hope that was right. It was exactly right, I said. He nodded, but the relief on his face was short-lived, replaced almost immediately by something that looked like grief. Calvin Merritt was not a man who cried easily. I had seen him manage layoffs and bankruptcies and a workplace accident that had put one of our crew in the hospital for 6 weeks, and he had held himself together through all of it. But his eyes were glassy now, and he pressed his lips together in a thin, hard line and stared at the hard hat in his hands. I've been with this company since I was 30 years old, he said. You gave me my first real job. You and Helen came to my daughter's wedding. You wrote a letter of recommendation for my son's college application. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I just need you to know whatever is happening. Whatever you need from me, every person in that building feels the same way. Every single one of them. My throat closed completely. I reached out and gripped his forearm, and he grabbed my hand with both of his and held on. And for a moment, neither of us was a 65-year-old man in a hospital bed or a 55-year-old operations director in a faded polo shirt. We were just two people who had built something together and were not willing to watch it be taken apart. Tell them to keep working, I said, when I could speak again. Tell them nothing changes. And Calvin, I squeezed his arm once before letting go. Don't say a word to Diana. Not yet. Calvin stood tucking the hard hat under his arm. He straightened his shoulders with the particular dignity of a man who has just been given a purpose. You have my word, he said. After he left, I lay back and stared at the ceiling and thought about $312,000 moving in small, careful increments out of an account that had taken me 15 years to build to a healthy balance. I thought about Meridian Properties and the 4-hour lunch in San Diego and Helen on the living room couch at midnight. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia. Calvin already sent me everything, she said before I could speak. I'm filing an emergency hold on all outbound transfers from the Callaway operating account tonight. Marcus won't be able to move another dollar. And the clients, we'll get to them. Her voice was sharp and certain as a survey line. But Arthur Calvin's records just gave us something more important than the money. What? They gave us a pattern, she said. And patterns are what courts believe. They arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon, Diana carrying a canvas tote bag and Marcus holding a manila folder pressed flat against his side, like he was trying to keep it from being noticed. He was not succeeding. Diana came to my bedside first, pressing her lips briefly to my forehead. Her mouth was cool and dry. "You look better," she said, in the warm, practiced voice of a woman who had decided what she wanted to find before she walked in the door. "The nurses said you've been resting well." "I've had time to think," I said. "That's good, Dad." She pulled the canvas tote onto the visitor chair and began removing items with careful efficiency. A container of soup from Arajon, a cashmere blanket. She set across my legs a get-well card she propped on the windowsill. Stage dressing. Every movement choreographed for an audience she believed was too medicated to notice the performance. Marcus set the manila folder on the bedside table without comment. "What's that?" I asked. "Just some paperwork," Diana said, turning from the window with a smile so gentle it could have convinced a jury. "Patricia helped us put it together. Routine authorization forms so I can handle things while you recover. Bills, business correspondence, that sort of thing." Patricia had done no such thing. I knew Patricia's letterhead the way I knew my own handwriting, 20 years of documents, contracts, estate planning. The header on the top page was wrong in 3 places. I reached for the folder anyway. Let them believe I was trusting. Let them believe the medications had softened my edges. The first page was a durable power of attorney, a legal document granting Diana full authority over my financial decisions, my business accounts, and my personal assets. In California, a durable power of attorney remains valid, even if the person who signed it becomes incapacitated. It was in every legal sense a document designed to hand Diana the keys to everything I had built while I was still alive and breathing, and sitting right in front of her. The second page was a beneficiary change form for my life insurance policy. My hand tightened on the papers. My chest felt like someone had placed a heavy stone directly over my sternum and was pressing down slowly, deliberately. I thought about Calvin's USB drive in Patricia's briefcase. I thought about $312,000 moving in careful increments. I thought about a red-tailed hawk circling above a parking structure. Then Diana sat on the edge of my bed and took my free hand in both of hers, and she looked at me with Helen's eyes, the same dark brown, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners, and my throat closed around everything new. "It's just to make things easier," she said softly, "so you don't have to worry, so you can focus on getting better." My hand found the pen on the bedside table, my fingers wrapped around it. I thought about Helen sitting across from me at a kitchen table in Burbank in 1988, both of us terrified and thrilled signing papers that would change our lives. I thought about how her hand had been shaking, and how I had covered it with mine, and how she had laughed, startled and bright, and said, "Well, here we go. Here we go." The pen moved toward the first signature line. The door opened. Raymond stepped in carrying a paper bag from the hospital cafeteria, moving with the unhurried ease of a man making a routine delivery. He set the bag on the table, glanced at the folder in my hands, and then looked at me with an expression so carefully neutral it communicated everything. "Mr. Calloway," he said pleasantly, "Dr. Whitfield's nurse asked me to remind you that your blood pressure reading was high this afternoon. He recommends avoiding any stressful activities or major decisions until tomorrow morning." Diana's smile tightened at the corners. "Raymond, we're in the middle of something." "Yes, ma'am." Raymond picked up the paper bag again and began unpacking it with maddening calm. "I won't be a minute." Marcus shifted his weight near the window. Diana looked at the folder, then at me, then at Raymond's unhurried hands moving between containers of food. I set the pen down. "Diana," I said, "leave the paperwork. I'll look at it in the morning when I'm fresher." A beat of silence. Something moved behind her eyes, fast, sharp, instantly controlled. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you need, Dad." After they left, Raymond pulled his chair close to the bed and dropped all pretense of calm. His hands were gripping his knees, and his jaw was set hard enough to crack stone. "That was not Patricia's letterhead," he said. "No," I said. "It wasn't." I looked at my hand, the one that had been holding the pen, and watched it tremble against the blanket. "Raymond, I need you to call Patricia tonight. Tell her I want to formally revoke every authorization Diana currently holds, in writing, filed by end of business tomorrow." Raymond was already reaching for his phone. "And Raymond," my voice dropped, "thank you." He looked up at me with an expression that made my chest ache in an entirely different way than it had all day. 30 years, he said simply. "Don't thank me for 30 years. Before I tell you what the doctor told me next, and trust me, everything changes after this moment, I need to know if you're still with me. Drop the number 7 in the comments right now, because what Arthur does with the truth he's about to receive is something most people would never have the courage to do. Don't go anywhere. This story contains fictional elements crafted for emotional impact. If that's not for you, no judgment. But if you're staying, you won't regret it." Diana sent flowers again Wednesday morning. White lilies this time arranged in a tall glass vase that a hospital volunteer carried in at 8 o'clock with a handwritten card tucked into the stems. I read the card while Patricia was setting up her laptop at the foot of my bed. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that written things become evidence. "Dad, we are with you through every moment of this. All our love, Diana and Marcus." I set the card face down on the bedside table. "She's been sending flowers every morning," I said. Patricia looked up from her screen. "Image management," she said without particular emotion. "The nurses remember the families who send flowers." At 8:30, her phone rang. She answered it, listened for approximately 4 seconds, and then held it out to me. "Dr. Park," she said. "She wants to speak with you directly." Dr. Susan Park had a voice that was calm and unhurried, in the way that genuinely confident people are calm, not performed, not careful, just settled. She was an independent specialist in gastroenterological oncology at UCLA Medical Center, and Patricia had retained her 2 days ago to conduct a blind review of my imaging, my blood work, and Dr. Whitfield's preliminary notes. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I've completed my review. I want to be direct with you." "Please," I said. "The mass near your pancreas is not consistent with late-stage malignancy." A pause, not the careful, protective pause of Dr. Whitfield, but the brief pause of a woman organizing precise information. "What I'm seeing in the imaging is most consistent with a walled-off pancreatic pseudocyst with secondary infection. It's a serious condition, I want to be clear about that. The infection requires aggressive antibiotic treatment and very likely a drainage procedure. But it is treatable, fully and completely treatable." The room moved. Not physically. Nothing in the room changed. The monitor beeped. The morning light came through the window at the same angle. Patricia sat perfectly still at the foot of my bed. But something shifted in the air, the way it shifts in the moment, before an earthquake, when the world holds its breath before deciding what to do next. "You're telling me I'm not dying," I said. "I'm telling you that you have a serious but treatable infection," Dr. Park said, "and that in my professional opinion, a terminal prognosis based on this imaging alone is not medically supportable." Another pause. I'd like to arrange for you to be transferred to UCLA for the drainage procedure and a full course of IV antibiotics. With proper treatment, Mr. Calloway, I expect a full recovery. I pressed the phone against my ear and stared out the window at the Los Angeles morning, the pale October sky, the distant line of the San Gabriel Mountains, a single contrail dissolving slowly above the basin. I thought about Helen. I thought about the Mustang in the garage. I thought about Diana's handwriting on that card. All our love. Dr. Park, I said, how quickly do you need an answer about the transfer? By end of day today would be ideal. I'll call you back within the hour. I handed the phone to Patricia. My hand was not shaking. That surprised me. Patricia looked at me carefully. Arthur? I heard her, I said. You're not dying. I heard her, Patricia. She waited. Outside in the hallway, a breakfast cart rolled past with a sound like distant wind chimes. Raymond, who had been sitting quietly in the corner chair since 7 in the morning, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. Does Diana know? He asked quietly. No, I said. Raymond looked up. And she's not going to know, I continued. Not yet. I looked at Patricia. How long do we need to finish everything? The trust, the transfers, the revocations. All of it locked completely. Patricia didn't hesitate. If we draft today and tomorrow, you sign Friday morning bank confirmation, by Friday afternoon, everything is irreversible before the weekend. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then Diana has until Saturday, I said, to keep believing she's won. I looked toward the window again, toward that pale October sky that I was. It turned out going to keep seeing for a good while longer. Something moved through my chest that was too complicated to name relief and grief and fury, and something that felt almost like gratitude, all of it tangled together like wires in a junction box. Let them keep planning. I want to see exactly what they do when they think there are no consequences. Raymond made a sound low, sharp, involuntary, and pressed his fist briefly against his mouth. Patricia opened her legal pad and clicked her pen. Then we have work to do, she said. Patricia worked the way she always worked, methodically, without wasted motion, like a surgeon who has performed the same procedure enough times to know exactly where every instrument needs to be before the first incision. She pulled 6 folders from her briefcase and arranged them on the rolling table beside my bed in a specific order, then uncapped her pen and looked at me. Before we start, she said, I need to ask you something I don't usually ask clients. Ask, are you doing this because you're angry or because it's right? I had been expecting legal questions, procedural questions. I had not been expecting that one. I sat with it for a moment, genuinely turned it over the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. Both, I said finally, but mostly because it's right. Patricia nodded once as if I had passed a test she hadn't announced she was giving. Good, she said. Angry alone makes mistakes. Right alone sometimes lacks the will to follow through. Both together, she tapped the first folder, build something that holds up in court. She opened the folder and we began. The first instrument was the irrevocable trust, a legal structure under California probate code that would transfer full ownership of Callaway Construction and its associated assets into a trust I controlled as trustee during my lifetime with Calvin Merritt, named as successor trustee. Irrevocable meant exactly what it sounded like. Once signed and filed, no one, not Diana, not a court acting on Diana's behalf, not Marcus Webb, and whatever attorney he hired could undo it without my explicit consent. The trust includes a no-contest clause, Patricia explained, spreading the document so I could follow along. In California, a no-contest clause, sometimes called an in terrorem clause, means that any beneficiary who legally challenges the trust or attempts to overturn it through litigation automatically forfeits whatever the trust would have given them. Diana receives what you've decided she receives. The moment she files a single motion to contest, she receives nothing. What have I decided she receives? I asked. Patricia looked at me carefully. That's your decision, Arthur, not mine. I thought about it. I thought about a little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives up the coast, who had called me from college crying over a failed exam at 2 a.m, who had stood beside me at Helen's grave in the January rain, with her arm around my waist and her face pressed against my shoulder. I thought about 14 months. She gets what I would have given her before any of this started, I said. What a father gives a daughter he loves, not what a conspirator earns. I paused. And not $1 more for what she planned. Patricia wrote it down without comment. That was one of the things I had always valued most about her. The second document was the formal revocation of power of attorney, a legal instrument revoking every financial authorization Diana currently held, filed simultaneously with my bank, with Callaway Construction's corporate accounts, and with the insurance carrier. Patricia had already drafted it the previous evening. She slid it across to me, and I read every line. Once this is filed, she said, Diana cannot authorize a single transaction. She cannot speak to the bank on your behalf. She cannot access the operating account. She cannot change the insurance beneficiary. Patricia's voice was precise and level. Every door she thinks she has a key to becomes a wall. The third document restructured the company's ownership. 15% of Callaway Construction transferred to Raymond Cole, a percentage of shares distributed among 12 senior employees who had been with the company more than 10 years, and Calvin Merritt, formally appointed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately upon filing. When I got to Raymond's name on the page, something tightened behind my sternum. He's going to argue about this, I said. He already did, Patricia said, with the faintest trace of a smile. I called him this morning to confirm the percentage. He told me, and I'm quoting directly, that he didn't need anything, and I should put the money toward the employees instead. She paused. I told him that was very noble and also not his decision. Raymond, who was sitting in the corner chair, cleared his throat loudly and stared at the window with great focus. Raymond, I said. Sir, stop arguing. A pause. I wasn't saying anything. You were thinking it loudly. Patricia covered her mouth briefly with 2 fingers. When she lowered her hand, her expression was professionally neutral again. The fourth document changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy, $8 million redirected from Diana's name to the Helen Callaway Educational Foundation, a nonprofit I was establishing, to fund construction and architecture scholarships at California State University campuses across the state. Helen's name on the letterhead. Helen's name on the scholarship awards. Helen's name in the lobby of every building those students would one day design and build. I had to stop for a moment when Patricia handed me that page. My chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with the infection. I pressed my fingers flat against the document and breathed through it in through the nose, out slow, the way Helen had taught me when I used to get so anxious before big contract presentations that I couldn't think straight. She would have loved this, I said. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Raymond stood up from his chair, walked to the window, and stood there with his back to the room and his shoulders very straight. I understood. Some things you handle better when nobody can see your face. She would have been furious about the circumstances, Patricia said quietly, and she would have loved every word of this document. She slid the final page toward me. Sign here, Arthur, and here, and initial at the bottom. I picked up the pen. This time my hand was completely steady. By 5 o'clock that Wednesday afternoon, Patricia had filed the revocation of power of attorney with Arthur's Bank and with Callaway Construction's corporate accounts. She had submitted the preliminary trust documents to the California Secretary of State's office for expedited processing. She had notified the insurance carrier that a beneficiary change was pending and that no other change requests were to be accepted without Arthur Callaway's written authorization, confirmed by two-factor verification. She gathered her folders, returned them to her briefcase in the same specific order she had removed them, and snapped the clasps closed with 2 decisive clicks. "Friday morning, Carol Jensen comes to the hospital with the final execution copies," she said, pulling on her coat. "You sign. Bank confirms by close of business Friday. Everything is locked before Saturday." "And Diana," I said. "Diana will spend Thursday and Friday believing she has already won." Patricia picked up her briefcase. "Let her. Overconfident people make careless mistakes. And careless mistakes," she looked at me steadily, "are exactly what we're going to need her to make." After she left the room, settled into the quiet hum of the hospital at early evening. Raymond came back from the window and sat down. We didn't speak for a while, just the two of us in the amber light of a Wednesday afternoon in October, somewhere above the city we had both spent our lives in. "Arthur," Raymond said finally. "Yeah, Helen would have done all of this herself." His voice was rough at the edges. "She wouldn't have waited for lawyers. She'd have walked in there and handled it personally." Despite everything, despite the infection and the IV line and the 14 months and Diana's handwriting on that card, I laughed. A real laugh, short and startled and genuine. "She absolutely would have," I said. Raymond smiled. It was the first smile either of us had managed in 3 days, and it felt like the first clean breath of air after a very long time underground. Raymond sent me the footage at 6:47 Thursday morning. I had been awake since 5, lying in the gray pre-dawn light of the hospital room, with the IV drip cycling quietly beside me, running through the documents Patricia and I had worked through the previous afternoon. When my phone buzzed on the bedside table and Raymond's name appeared on the screen, I sat up and opened the file before I was fully conscious of deciding to do so. He had edited the security footage into a single clip, 4 minutes and 22 seconds timestamp reading. 2:14 in the morning of Thursday, Wednesday night. Bleeding into the early hours before dawn, shot from the camera mounted in the upper corner of my home office. The camera was one of 8 Raymond had installed throughout the house 2 years ago, part of a full system upgrade I had approved without much thought. He had never mentioned it to Diana. The image was sharp and clear in night vision green. Diana came through the office door first, moving quickly, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt and leggings, the clothes of a woman who had lain awake in bed until 2 in the morning, telling herself to wait, and finally given up waiting. Marcus followed 2 steps behind her, carrying a small flashlight, even though Diana had already reached for the desk lamp. She turned the desk lamp off almost immediately. "The camera," Marcus said, his voice barely audible even on the enhanced audio track. Diana shook her head. "The cameras only cover the entry points in the garage. My father was very specific about that when he had them installed." She was moving toward the wall panel beside the bookcase with the focused confidence of someone executing a plan she had rehearsed many times. He didn't want to feel like he was living in a surveillance state inside his own home. She pressed her palm flat against the panel. The safe door swung open. My stomach turned. She had not tried the wrong code. She had gone directly without hesitation to the combination she remembered from childhood, the one I had used for 20 years before changing it after Helen died. Then, when the lock didn't respond, she had paused for exactly 3 seconds and tried the secondary combination. The one I used for everything that mattered. Helen's birthday. month, day, year. The safe opened on the second attempt. Diana reached inside with both hands and began removing files with practiced efficiency, financial statements, property, deeds, insurance, documents. She set each one on the desk, scanned it briefly, and moved to the next. Marcus stood behind her flashlight in hand, scanning each document she discarded. Then she found the envelope. It was cream-colored, letter-sized, sealed with the embossed return address of Walsh and Norris Attorneys at Law, Patricia's firm, from before she restructured her practice 12 years ago. Diana held it up to the flashlight beam for a moment. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from nerves, I realized, but from something that looked like excitement. She opened it carefully, unfolded the document inside, and began to read. What happened to her face in the next 30 seconds was something I would carry with me for a long time. The tight, controlled expression she had been wearing since she walked through the office door dissolved completely. Her shoulders dropped, her chin lifted, and she smiled wide and unguarded and real in a way I had not seen on her face since she was a teenager. And the wrongness of seeing that expression in that context, in that green-tinted footage at 2 a.m, hit me somewhere below the sternum and stayed there. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was almost reverent. He leaned over her shoulder and read. After a moment, he exhaled a long, shaking breath. "That's it. That's everything." Diana folded the document with careful hands and held it against her chest for a moment before placing it in the bag she had brought. "This is the will. This is all of it." Her voice was steady now, certain, the boardroom voice fully restored. "We're done waiting." Marcus put his hand on her shoulder. "You're sure?" "I'm completely sure." She zipped the bag closed. "Let's go back upstairs." They left the office. The desk lamp stayed off. The safe stayed open. I watched the empty room for the remaining 40 seconds of the footage, the cursor blinking in the dark, the open safe like a mouth with nothing left inside it to say. Then I called Raymond. He answered on the first ring. "You watched it." "I watched it." My voice came out flat and careful, the way it did when I was containing something I didn't want to spill. "Raymond, the will she took, that's the 2009 version." "Yes, sir." Patricia filed the updated version in 2019. "The one Diana just took has been superseded for 15 years. "Yes, sir." A pause. "She doesn't know that." No, I said. "She doesn't." I set the phone on the blanket for a moment and pressed both hands over my face, not from grief, not from anger, but from the sheer, exhausted weight of understanding exactly what I was looking at. My daughter at 2 a.m, holding a document against her chest like it was something precious, smiling, that wide, unguarded smile. I picked the phone back up. "Don't touch the safe," I said. "Don't rearrange anything in that office. Leave it exactly as they left it." "Already done," Raymond said. "Patricia wants to know if you've seen it yet." "Call her," I said. "Tell her Diana has a 15-year-old will and thinks she's already won." I looked out the window at the Thursday morning sky, pale and clear and wide above Los Angeles. "Tell her we're still on schedule." Patricia called me from the sidewalk outside the FBI field office at 4:58 Thursday afternoon. I knew it was her before I looked at the screen. She was the only person in my life who called at exactly the time she said she would call, not 2 minutes early, not 30 seconds late. I had always found it one of her most reassuring qualities. "Tell me," I said. She was quiet for a beat. The particular quiet of a woman who is standing on a public sidewalk in Los Angeles and choosing her words with the awareness that she is choosing them carefully. "I need to ask you something first. How are you feeling, Patricia? Arthur? Tell me what happened in that building." I heard her exhale, short, controlled. Then I walked in with everything. Calvin's records, Raymond's photographs, the email chain, the shell company registration, the footage from the safe. I put it on the table in front of a man named Tom Briggs, Special Agent, Financial Crimes Division, and I gave him 40 minutes of my best work. And he listened to the whole thing without writing down a single note. Her voice carried a thread of something that might have been admiration if she'd been willing to admit it, which I found either very impressive or very alarming, and I couldn't decide which until he opened his desk drawer. I sat up straighter against the pillows. What was in the drawer? A file, Patricia said, considerably thicker than mine. A pause that lasted exactly long enough for the weight of it to land. Arthur, the FBI, has been investigating Marcus Webb for 8 months, independently, without any involvement from us. The monitor beside my bed registered the jump in my heart rate. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum and breathed through it. 8 months, I said. Web Development Solutions isn't just a shell company designed to steal your clients, Patricia said. It's one node in a financial network that moves money through at least 7 entities across 5 states. The FBI has been mapping it since February. They know the structure, they know the players, they know the amounts. One of those players had been moving money through an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account registered under a shell entity with no public connection to Marcus Webb, but traceable through wire transfer patterns the FBI's financial analysts had been mapping for months. Her voice dropped slightly. What they didn't have was the legitimate business connection the established company Marcus was using to give the money a clean entry point into the legal economy. Callaway Construction, I said. The words tasted like something bitter at the back of my throat. Callaway Construction, she confirmed. The operating account, the client invoices, the payroll transfers. Marcus wasn't just stealing from you, Arthur. He was laundering money through you, through a company with 40 years of clean financial history and an impeccable reputation with every bank in Los Angeles County. A pause. That's why he needed Diana to give him access. And that's why Diana is not a peripheral figure in this. She's a material participant. The full shape of it settled over me then, not like a revelation, but like a confirmation of something I had been circling for days without letting myself look at directly. Diana had not stumbled into Marcus Webb's scheme. She had opened the door for it. She had handed him the keys to a 40-year institution and stood at the threshold while he walked through. What did Briggs say? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He said, Patricia paused and I could hear the faint sound of Los Angeles traffic around her, the city going about its Thursday afternoon, with complete indifference to the conversation happening on its sidewalk. He said, and I'm quoting Ms. Norris, we've been waiting 8 months for someone to walk through that door with exactly what you just put on my table. He also said that an arrest made at a private residence or a legal setting creates complications. An arrest made at a large social gathering with witnesses present and documentary evidence already in the room is cleaner, I said. Is considerably cleaner, Patricia agreed. He asked if we had anything scheduled this weekend. I thought about Diana's call on Tuesday, her gentle, persistent suggestion that we host a gathering at the house, a chance for my friends to see me while I still had the strength. I had agreed with a steadiness that surprised even me. Saturday, I said. She's already planning it. Then Briggs will be ready Saturday. Patricia's voice shifted into something more direct. Arthur, I need you to understand what this means. Once Briggs moves, this stops being a civil matter and becomes a federal criminal investigation. The timeline, the evidence, the outcome, we lose a certain amount of control over how it unfolds. Patricia. I looked out the window at the Thursday sky and the same pale October blue it had been all week, unwavering and clear. I've been trying to control this situation since Monday night. I'm tired of controlling it. I paused. Let the truth handle itself. She was quiet for a moment. Briggs wants a direct line to Raymond for Saturday's logistics, she said finally. Can you arrange that? Already done, I said before I had even consciously decided. Tell Briggs to call Raymond tonight. One more thing, Patricia said. Her voice shifted in a way I recognized the tone she used when she was delivering the part of the information she had saved for last, because she knew it was the part that would land hardest. I cross-referenced the dates in the FBI file with our own timeline. The first transaction Marcus ran through the Callaway operating account. She paused. Tell me, I said. 16 months ago, she said. 2 months before Diana ever asked you to give her operational control of the company. The phone felt heavy in my hand. 16 months. Diana had handed Marcus access to Callaway Construction's financial infrastructure before she had even formally asked me if she could run it. She had given him the keys before she had officially received them. Before I had signed a single piece of paper transferring authority, she hadn't waited for my trust. She had assumed it and spent it before I had even offered it. Arthur, Patricia said carefully, are you all right? I looked down at my hand on the blanket. The same hand that had built a company from nothing, that had signed 40 years of contracts and payroll checks and loan agreements and permits. The hand that had held Helen's when she was frightened and held Diana's when she was small and couldn't sleep and needed someone to tell her that everything was going to be fine. I'll be fine, I said. I'll be fine by Saturday. Nora Callaway walked through the door of room 614 at 8:17 Thursday evening, carrying a paper bag from Soto Mare, my favorite North Beach restaurant in San Francisco, and the expression of a woman who had been on a plane for 90 minutes, rehearsing exactly what she was going to say, and had already decided to throw all of it out. She set the bag on the table, pulled off her coat, looked at me in the hospital bed with the IV line in my arm, and the monitor beeping beside my head, and burst into tears. Not gentle tears. Not the composed, dignified kind that people produce in hospital rooms when they are trying to hold themselves together. Nora pressed both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders shook, and her whole face crumpled, and she made a sound that came from somewhere so deep and unguarded that it hit me in the chest like a physical impact. Hey, I said. My own throat closed immediately. Hey, come here. She crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed my hand with both of hers and held on. And for a moment, we just stayed like that. My 60-year-old sister standing beside my hospital bed, crying in a way she hadn't let herself cry since our mother's funeral 23 years ago, and me gripping her hands and pressing my lips together so hard they went numb, because if I let myself go right now, I would not stop. You should have called me Monday, she said when she could speak. Her voice was rough and wet and furious. Arthur, you should have called me the moment they told you. I know, I said. I had to hear it from Raymond. I know Nora. You are 65 years old, and you were lying in a hospital bed alone. I had Raymond. Raymond is not your sister. She pulled back far enough to look at me. Her eyes red and her cheeks wet, and her expression caught somewhere between relief and anger and grief in a combination so familiar to me that it made my chest ache. This was the face she had made at me our entire lives, when I had borrowed her bicycle without asking at age 9 when I had driven home in a snowstorm that I should have waited out when I had worked through a fever for 3 days in 1997 because I had a deadline and couldn't afford to stop. The face that said, I love you, and you are an idiot, and I am so relieved you are still here. Sit down, I said. There's something I need to tell you. All of it. She sat. She pulled her chair so close the armrest touched the bed rail. She reached into the paper bag from Sotomare and produced 2 containers of Cioppino San Francisco's famous seafood stew, tomato red, and fragrant even through the plastic lids, and set one in front of me with the wordless practicality of a woman who understood that bad news was always easier to receive when your hands had something to do. I talked for 40 minutes. I told her about the CT scan and Dr. Whitfield's careful words. I told her about Diana's hand around mine and the exhale she released when the nurse's footsteps faded. I told her about Marcus checking his watch, about the whispered conversation I had absorbed from beneath half-closed eyes. I told her about Raymond finding the emails about Patricia and the conservatorship filing about Calvin's USB drive and the $312,000. I told her about Dr. Park's call Wednesday morning, about the irrevocable trust and the revoked authorizations, about Diana at 2 in the morning pressing a 15-year-old will against her chest and smiling. I told her about 16 months. Nora ate her cioppino while I talked, which was exactly the right thing to do. It kept her hands occupied and her eyes down and gave her something to focus on that wasn't my face, which meant she could absorb what I was saying without her reactions interrupting the telling. She had always known how to listen to me. It was one of the things I had never properly thanked her for. When I finished, she set her spoon down and was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, Los Angeles glittered in its Thursday night configuration, the 405 a slow river of red taillights, heading south the dark mass of the Santa Monica Mountains, against a sky that was never quite black this close to the city. I told you about Marcus, she said finally. 4 years ago, when Diana first brought him to Thanksgiving. You said he had the eyes of a man who was always calculating the distance to the nearest exit, I said. And you said I was being uncharitable. She looked at me steadily. You were right, I said. I'm sorry. Something moved across her face, quick, complicated, the relief of being told you were right about something you had desperately hoped you were wrong about. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. Arthur. Her voice was quieter now, the anger burned through, and what remained was something older and softer. I need to ask you something honest, and I need you to actually answer it. Ask. When you look at what Diana did, all of it, the whole 14 months, the documents, the planning, the way she sat beside you and held your hand while she was thinking about insurance payouts. Nora's voice tightened but held. Are you doing what you're doing because you want to hurt her? Or because it's the right thing? The question landed exactly where she intended it to land. I sat with it the way I had sat with Patricia's version of the same question that morning, but it was different coming from Nora, sharper, more personal, aimed at something Patricia couldn't quite reach. I loved her, I said. I love her. That doesn't disappear because she did this. My voice cracked on the last sentence, and I let it crack because there was no point pretending otherwise, not with Nora, not at 8:30 on a Thursday night, in a hospital room with Cioppino going cold between us. But love doesn't mean letting her finish what she started. It doesn't mean protecting her from the consequences of what she chose. Nora reached out and put her hand over mine. Her palm was warm in the specific way that only people who have known you your whole life can be warm, a warmth that carries history in it. Helen would have been devastated, she said quietly. And she would have done exactly what you're doing, in half the time with considerably more colorful language. The laugh that came out of me was startled and genuine and slightly undignified, which was exactly what I needed. She would have called Patricia from the parking lot, I said. She would have called Patricia from the bed, Nora said, before the doctor even finished the sentence. We laughed together in the hospital room on Thursday night. The two of us, the last 2 Callaways from Sacramento, who had grown up in a house with a leaky roof and a father who came home smelling like cement and taught us both that the things worth having were the things you built yourself. When the laughter settled, Nora squeezed my hand and looked at me with clear, steady eyes. "I'll be there Saturday," she said. "Front row." "Nora, you don't have to." Arthur James Calloway. Her voice carried every one of her 60 years, and then some. "Helen would have been in that front row. I am going in her place, and you are not going to argue with me about it." I looked at my sister, her red eyes and her straight spine, and her hand still wrapped around mine, and felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched tight since Monday afternoon. Not everything, not all of it, but enough. "Okay," I said. "Front row." Diana called at 9 o'clock Friday morning. I was halfway through the cup of coffee Raymond had brought from the blue bottle kiosk in the hospital lobby, real coffee, not the vending machine variety, because Raymond had decided that if I was going to spend a week in a hospital bed, I was at minimum going to drink something worth drinking, when my phone lit up with her name, and I set the cup down and answered. "Dad." Her voice was warm and textured with careful concern. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Tired," I said. I added a slight roughness to my voice that wasn't entirely manufactured. "The nights are hard." "I know." A pause filled with performed sympathy. "Marcus and I were thinking we'd come by this afternoon. We wanted to talk to you about the gathering tomorrow, finalize some details, make sure you're comfortable with everything." "That sounds good," I said. "Come around 3. "Perfect." Another pause. "Dad, I hope you know how much we love you, how much this week has meant to us being close to you." I looked at the window. The Friday morning sky above Los Angeles was the same clear October blue it had been all week, untroubled and indifferent. "I know," I said. After I hung up, Raymond looked at me from across the room. 3 o'clock, I said, "which means we need everything signed and confirmed before 2. Raymond checked his watch and reached for his phone. "I'll call Carol Jensen." Carol Jensen arrived at 10:15, a compact, efficient woman in her early 50s with silver-rimmed reading glasses and a rolling briefcase that she navigated through the hospital corridor with the practiced ease of someone who spent most of her professional life in places people didn't want to be. She was a certified mobile notary in the state of California, and Patricia had worked with her on 3 previous estate matters. She shook my hand, set her briefcase on the rolling table, and looked at me with the direct, appraising eyes of a woman whose job required her to determine quickly and accurately whether the person in front of her was in full possession of their faculties. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "before we begin, I need to ask you some standard questions. Can you tell me today's date?" "Friday, October 18th, I said. "Can you tell me where we are?" "Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles, California. Room 614. "Can you tell me in your own words what documents you'll be signing today and what they accomplish?" I looked at Carol Jensen steadily. "I'm executing an irrevocable trust that transfers ownership of Calloway Construction and its associated assets into a trust structure I control during my lifetime with Calvin Merritt as successor trustee. I'm confirming a beneficiary change on a life insurance policy valued at $8 million, redirecting it to the Helen Calloway Educational Foundation. I'm formalizing ownership transfers of 15% of company equity to Raymond Cole and distributing additional shares among 12 long-term employees. And I'm signing the final revocation of all financial authorizations previously held by my daughter, Diana Calloway. I held Carol's gaze. "I understand that these documents are permanent and largely irreversible, and I am signing them of my own free will without coercion, with complete awareness of their consequences." Carol Jensen looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened her briefcase. "Let's begin," she said. Patricia arrived at 10:30 with the execution copies fresh from the printer, organized in the same 6-folder system she had used Wednesday afternoon. She spread them across the rolling table and bed tray in precise order, and for the next 90 minutes, the three of us worked through them page by page. Carol witnessing each signature, Patricia explaining each provision, me reading every line before I signed, because Helen had taught me never to sign anything I hadn't read, and I was not about to stop now. My hand shook slightly on the first page, not from uncertainty, from the particular physical weight of a moment that has been building for a long time finally arriving. By the third document, it had steadied completely. Raymond sat in the corner chair, throughout turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands, not reading, not looking at his phone, just present in the way that he had always been present, when it mattered, quietly, without drawing attention to himself, making the room feel less like a place where something was ending and more like a place where something was being decided. At 12:45, Patricia gathered the signed documents into her briefcase and stood. "I'm going directly to the bank," she said. "Wells Fargo Private Client Services, they've been notified to expect me and to process same-day confirmation." She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "By 4 o'clock today, Arthur, every document is filed, every authorization is confirmed, and every account is restructured. Diana Calloway will have no legal access to a single dollar of your assets or a single share of your company." The words landed in the room with a weight that was not entirely unpleasant. "Go," I said. She went. Raymond poured himself the last of the coffee from the carafe on the side table and sat back down. The room was very quiet without Patricia's organized efficiency filling it. Outside the window, Los Angeles was going about its Friday afternoon, the slow accumulation of weekend traffic on the streets below the pale contrail of a westbound flight dissolving above the basin. "How do you feel?" Raymond asked. I thought about it honestly. "Like I've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time," I said, "and I've finally set it down. But my arms still remember the weight." Raymond held his coffee cup in both hands and looked at it. After a moment, he said without looking up, "Helen used to say that the hardest part of finishing something wasn't finishing it. It was figuring out what to do with your hands afterward." My chest tightened in the particular way it always did when Raymond said something that sounded exactly like her. "She did say that," I said quietly. "I know." He looked up. "She said it the day you signed the papers on the first Calloway construction office, 1988 on Figueroa Street. She said it standing on the sidewalk outside while you were still in there talking to the landlord." His eyes were bright. "I was loading equipment into the truck. I don't think she knew I heard her." Patricia called at 3:57. "It's done," she said. "Every document filed, every account restructured. Bank confirmation in writing time-stamped 3:52 this afternoon." A pause. "Arthur, every door is locked." I held the phone against my ear and looked out the window at the Friday afternoon sky. In 45 minutes, Diana and Marcus would walk through the door of room 614, warm and solicitous, and carefully grieving to finalize the details of a gathering designed to celebrate my imminent death. They would sit beside my bed and hold my hand and ask whether I wanted flowers or just candles, and whether Pastor Moore should say something at the beginning or the end. And I would tell them flowers were fine, candles were lovely, and Pastor Moore could say whatever felt right, because by 3:52 this afternoon, there was nothing left for them to take. Raymond called me at 11:45 Saturday morning from inside the house. I was sitting in the back seat of my silver Cadillac CT5, parked 2 blocks north of the Bel Air property on Bellagio Road, wearing the navy suit Helen had picked out for my 62nd birthday, and watching a catering van unload trays of food through the rear gate of my own home. Raymond had gone in ahead of me an hour earlier under the pretense of checking the backyard drainage, an excuse so old between the two of us that it had developed its own comfortable grooves. "Full house," he said quietly. "I count at least 180 people and more still arriving." White lilies everywhere on the dining table, the mantel, the side tables in the hall. She ordered them from a florist on Sunset. There's a slideshow running on the television in the living room. "What's in the slideshow?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "You and Diana. Holidays, vacations, what looks like a company event from a few years back." A pause. "Helen isn't in it." I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose and held them there for a moment. Outside the car window, a pair of mockingbirds were arguing loudly in a jacaranda tree, indifferent to everything happening 2 blocks south. "Calvin?" I asked. "Here, standing near the fireplace with a glass of water he hasn't touched." Raymond's voice dropped slightly. "He looks like a man trying very hard not to say something." "Good. Tell him to keep not saying it." I straightened my tie in the reflection of the car window. "What about Nora?" "Arrived 20 minutes ago. She's near the back wall of the living room. Nobody's approached her yet. Nobody knows who she is." A brief pause. "She's been watching Diana work the room. Her expression is—" Raymond seemed to search for the word. "Precise." Despite everything that made me want to smile. Nora had always had the most precise expressions of anyone I knew. "And Briggs?" I asked. "3 vehicles on Bellagio Road, no markings, engines off. I counted 4 agents when I came in. There may be more I didn't see." Another pause. "Agent Briggs himself is standing near the south garden wall. He's wearing a gray blazer and holding a cup of coffee and looks for all the world like a neighbor who wandered in from the street." "He probably does this a lot," I said. "Probably," Raymond agreed. Through the car window, I could see the edge of the property, the corner of the stone wall Helen and I had built in 2003 after the neighbor's dogs kept getting into the garden. She had spent 2 weekends choosing the exact right stones from a yard in Tujunga, driving back and forth in her old Land Cruiser with the back seats folded down. I had complained about the project the entire time and loved every minute of it. "Raymond," I said, "tell me what she's doing right now." "Diana." A pause while Raymond repositioned himself. "She's near the entry hall," he said, "accepting condolences. There's a line of people waiting to speak to her." His voice was carefully neutral. "She's Arthur. She's very good at this. The way she touches people's arms when she speaks to them. The way she pauses before she answers like she's gathering herself. She's wearing the pearl earrings, Helen's pearl earrings. The ones I had given Diana at her college graduation, because Helen would have wanted her to have them. The thing that moved through my chest then was not anger. It was something colder and quieter than anger, something that had no clean name but sat in the space between grief and resolution, and simply waited. "What about Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Working the perimeter of the room," Raymond said. "He's been introducing himself to your business contacts. I heard him tell the Meridian Properties representative that he's looking forward to continuing the relationship." Raymond's voice tightened fractionally on the last sentence. He said it with complete confidence, like it was already done. "It is already done," I said, "just not the way he thinks." Inside the house I could hear the faint sound of Pastor Gerald Moore's voice beginning a prayer warm and resonant, carrying even through the stone wall and 200 yards of California morning. Gerald Moore had been the pastor of our church for 22 years. He had officiated at Helen's funeral. He had sat with me in my kitchen afterward until 2 in the morning, drinking the bad coffee I made, because I couldn't remember how Helen's machine worked, and he had never once tried to give me a reason for something that had no reason. Diana had called him earlier that week and told him I was dying, and that I had asked for him personally. I had done no such thing. But Gerald was the kind of man who showed up when someone said he was needed, and Diana had known that about him when she made the call. I would deal with that guilt later. Through Raymond's phone, I heard the sound of 200 people settling into the particular quiet that falls when a room full of adults is asked to bow its head. Gerald Moore's voice rose and fell in the steady cadences of a man who had long ago made his peace with standing between the living and whatever came next. Then the prayer ended. Then I heard Marcus's voice carried easily across a room that had just gone respectfully still begin the introduction to his toast. The particular self-satisfied timbre of a man who believes he is standing at the beginning of something. On behalf of our family, Marcus said, his voice warm and expansive, we want to thank every one of you for being here today. Arthur Calloway built something extraordinary in this city over 40 years with his own hands, and our family intends to honor that legacy. I opened the car door. The October air hit my face cool and dry, and carrying the faint scent of jasmine from somewhere along the road. I put my hand on the roof of the car to steady myself as I stood, then straightened to my full height, adjusted my jacket, picked up my cane from the seat beside me, and looked down the quiet residential street toward the iron gate of the property I had owned for 26 years. Raymond's voice came through the phone, which I was still holding loosely at my side. Arthur, he said quietly, are you ready? I looked at the gate. Behind it, Marcus Webb was still talking. Behind it, Diana was standing in front of Helen's pearl earrings and a slideshow that had erased 40 years of a woman's life. Behind it, 200 people who had known me, who had worked with me, eaten at my table, stood beside me at Helen's grave, were listening to a story about my family that was not true. I put the phone in my pocket. Open the front door, I said. Before I tell you what Arthur did next, before I show you exactly how 16 months of planning by two people who thought they had won came apart in one Saturday afternoon, drop a number 14 in the comments and let me know you're still here. Every single comment means the world to me. Stay close. This is the moment everything changes. Some elements in this story are fictional, shaped to carry a message worth hearing. Any resemblance to real names or events is coincidental. But what happens next, that part will stay with you. The front door of my house opened inward the way it always had. I had walked through that door 10,000 times in 26 years. The first time with Helen beside me, both of us carrying boxes and laughing because we had forgotten to bring a single piece of furniture and the moving truck wasn't coming until Tuesday, and we were going to sleep on the floor of a 4,000 square foot house and find it completely perfect. The last time with Helen was a Tuesday in January 12 years ago, when I had brought her home from Cedars-Sinai for what the doctors called palliative care and what Helen called not dying in a hospital when she had a perfectly good bed at home every time in between. I stepped through the door. The foyer was crowded with people I recognized, Barbara and Jim Holloway, from 2 houses down the Meridian Properties team, in their Friday business casual. Calvin's foreman from the Glendale Project, the women from Helen's old book club, who still sent me Christmas cards every year without fail. They turned when the door opened, and then they went very still, not all at once. It moved through the room like a wave, the nearest people first, then the ones behind them, craning to see what had caused the first ones to stop, then the people in the living room doorway, then the room beyond. The stillness spread from the foyer through the hall and into the living room where Marcus Webb was standing, with a glass of champagne raised halfway to speaking height, and it reached him just as he was drawing breath for the next sentence. He lowered the glass. The slideshow on the television behind him kept running photographs of Diana and me at various Christmas dinners, Diana and me at a company event, Diana and me at what appeared to be a vineyard in Napa. The images scrolled past in silence over Marcus's shoulder, while 200 people looked at me standing in my own front doorway, in my navy suit, with my cane and my 65 years, and nobody said a word. I walked into my own home. People moved aside as I came through the foyer. Not quickly, not in a rush, but with the slow, stunned parting of a crowd that hasn't yet determined what it is witnessing. I heard someone near the back make a sound, sharp, involuntary, bitten off, and I heard Barbara Holloway say something to her husband, in a voice barely above a whisper. And I heard from somewhere near the fireplace Calvin Merritt exhale a breath that sounded like it had been held since Thursday. Diana was standing in the center of the living room. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and what happened to her face in that half-second was the most honest thing I had seen from her in 16 months. The carefully composed grief dissolved. Her lips parted. Her chin dropped a fraction of an inch. Her right hand, which had been resting gracefully on the back of a dining chair, gripped it so hard her knuckles went white, and the chair legs scraped against the hardwood floor. Then she pulled herself together. In less than 2 seconds. I had to admit even then that it was impressive. "Dad?" Her voice came out warm and startled and full of what sounded very much like joy. She took a step toward me. "Dad, you came. We didn't know you were feeling well enough." "I wanted to be home," I said. I walked past her. I walked to the center of the living room where Marcus was still standing with his champagne glass held at an uncertain angle, and I stopped and looked at him for a moment without speaking. His face had gone the color of old concrete. His jaw was working slightly, the way a man's jaw works when he is running through options and finding each one worse than the last. "Marcus," I said pleasantly, "I believe you were in the middle of something." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "Please," I said, "don't let me interrupt." I turned to face the room. 200 faces looked back at me, some frightened, some confused, some with the dawning expression of people who are beginning to understand that they have been present at something other than what they were told they were attending. I found Nora near the back wall. She was standing very straight, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes on me with an expression so steady and so full that I had to look away before it unmade me completely. I found Calvin near the fireplace. He gave me a single nod, small, precise, the nod of a man who has been waiting 5 days to make it. I looked at Raymond, who was standing near the built-in bookcase on the east wall, with a small Bluetooth speaker in one hand and his phone in the other, and I gave him the smallest possible nod. He pressed play. My voice filled the living room, first thin and sedated through the hospital room audio, asking Diana to rest, telling her I was tired. Then the sound of the door. Then footsteps. Then Diana's exhale, long, slow, released, like something she had been holding in for a very long time. And then her voice. Clear and close and unmistakable, recorded on the small voice recorder Raymond had left inside my suit jacket pocket when he visited Monday night, a device no larger than a pack of gum tucked beneath my folded handkerchief, where no one would think to look. "Finally," Diana said from the speaker in Raymond's hand, and from every corner of the living room simultaneously. 4 more days, and then everything becomes mine." The room did not go quiet. It was already quiet. What happened was something beyond quiet, a quality of stillness that had weight to it that pressed against the walls and the white lilies and the scrolling slideshow and the champagne glasses and the catered trays of food from the restaurant on Sunset. A stillness in which 200 people stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Then Marcus's voice from the speaker, "I'm taking his car. Sell it, we cover part of the debt." Diana's hand released the chair back. She turned to look at the speaker in Raymond's hand. Then she turned to look at me. Her face had gone through 3 expressions in the past 90 seconds. Joy, control, shock. And now it was doing something I had never seen it do before. It was doing nothing. It was completely, utterly blank, the way a screen goes blank when the power cuts, and there is nothing left behind it. Her mouth opened. "That recording," she said, her voice coming out thin and strange, stripped of every performance quality she had spent 16 months perfecting, was made without my consent. It was made, I said quietly, in a room where you had no reasonable expectation of privacy. A hospital room with open doors, active medical staff, and a patient who was fully conscious. I held her gaze. My attorney assures me that's more than sufficient for a federal conspiracy investigation. Behind Diana, the slideshow kept running. A photograph of the two of us at her college graduation, me, with tears on my face. I hadn't bothered to wipe Diana in her cap and gown, both of us squinting into the May sunshine on the UCLA quad. I looked at that photograph for exactly 1 second. Then I looked at my daughter. "There's more," I said. "Raymond." Raymond pressed the next file. The television behind Marcus stopped showing the slideshow. Patricia, standing near the hallway with her laptop open, had taken control of the display remotely, and what replaced the photographs of Diana and me at Christmas dinners and Napa Vineyards was a document. Clean white background, black text, the header of a private legal consultancy in Encino that Diana had hired 14 months ago. The room made a sound. Not words, just a collective involuntary intake of breath, 200 people registering at the same moment that something had fundamentally shifted. "That document," I said, keeping my voice level and carrying it to the back of the room the way 40 years of running job site meetings had taught me, "is a conservatorship strategy prepared for my daughter 6 weeks before I ever set foot in a hospital. It outlines a 4-stage plan to have me declared legally incompetent and transfer control of my company and assets to Diana and Marcus Webb." Diana's chin lifted. "That is a private legal consultation, and it has been taken completely out of context. The next document," I said, "is a bank statement." Patricia advanced the slide. The Callaway Construction operating account. 14 weeks of transactions. 11 transfers, each one calibrated carefully below the federal reporting threshold of $10,000, a technique called structuring, which under Title 31 of the United States Code is itself a federal crime independent of whatever the money was being used for. The transfers totaled $312,000. Each one carried Diana's secondary authorization code. Calvin Merritt stepped out of the crowd near the fireplace. He was not a large man, and he was not a loud man, but when Calvin moved toward the center of the room, people got out of his way, the way people get out of the way of something with real weight behind it. His voice when he spoke was completely steady. "Those are Callaway Construction's internal records," he said, addressing the room rather than Diana specifically. "I pulled them myself from our own system last Thursday. I have the retrieval logs if anyone wants to see them." Diana turned on him. "Calvin, you had no authority to—" "I had every authority," Calvin said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word "every" in a way that made it sound less like a legal argument and more like something personal, something earned over 25 years of 6 a.m. mornings and showing up when it was hard. "Mr. Callaway built this company. I work for Mr. Callaway." Patricia advanced to the next slide. The shell company registration for Web Development Solutions. Marcus Webb, sole proprietor, registered in California 11 months ago. Below it, side by side, 2 columns of client communication, one from the Callaway Construction server, one from a Web Development Solutions email address, showing the same clients being contacted in parallel, the same projects being pitched at a 5% discount, the same careful language designed to make Callaway Construction sound like a company in decline. Marcus Webb set his champagne glass down on the nearest surface. His eyes moved to the door on his left, then to the garden entrance on his right, then back to the front of the room where I was standing. I watched him calculate. "Marcus." My voice came out quieter than I intended, and somehow that made it carry further. "There's nowhere to go." His jaw tightened. Then he did what I had known on some level he would do, what men like Marcus Webb always do when the walls come in and there is only one move left. He turned to Diana. "This was her plan," he said. His voice was loud and sudden, pitched to the room, the voice of a man throwing something overboard to stay afloat. All of it. The conservatorship, the transfers, the clients. Diana came to me. I was trying to help my wife. The room reacted, a wave of movement, people shifting someone near the back, saying something sharp under their breath. Diana turned to look at her husband with an expression so cold it dropped the temperature of the room by several degrees. Her voice, when it came, was precise and utterly without panic. "Really, Marcus?" She tilted her head slightly. "Then explain why Web Development Solutions is registered solely in your name. Explain why your personal email coordinated every client transfer. Explain why the offshore account the FBI has been examining for 8 months has only one signatory." She paused. "Explain that without me." The room went so still I could hear the white lilies in their vases. Pastor Gerald Moore, who had been standing near the dining room doorway, with his hands folded and his face composed in the careful expression of a man absorbing information. He wished he did not have, took one slow step forward. "Diana," he said quietly. "Let him finish." He was not talking about Marcus. The garden door opened. Agent Tom Briggs stepped through in his gray blazer, coffee still in hand, with 2 agents behind him, moving in the unhurried way of people who have already won and know it. He crossed the living room without rushing, without drama, with the flat professional calm of a man who had done this many times and found that calm was always more effective than urgency. He stopped in front of Marcus Webb. "Mr. Webb," Briggs said, "I'm Special Agent Tom Briggs, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges including wire fraud, money laundering, structuring, and conspiracy." He reached for his cuffs with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone completing a routine task. "Please turn around." Marcus Webb looked at Diana. Diana looked at the floor. Marcus turned around. The room breathed again after Marcus was gone. Not fully, not the easy, unconscious breathing of 200 people at a Saturday afternoon gathering. More like the careful, measured breathing of people who understood they were still inside something that hadn't finished yet, and who were waiting to see what came next before they decided how to feel about any of it. Diana was still standing in the center of the living room. She hadn't moved when Briggs led Marcus through the garden door. She hadn't flinched when the door closed behind them, with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. She was standing exactly where she had been standing for the past 10 minutes, and the expression on her face was the one I recognized least from the 38 years I had known her, not grief, not anger, not the performed concern she had been wearing all week. Just calculation. Pure, forward-looking, entirely undisguised calculation. She was already thinking about what came next. "You planned this," she said. Her voice was steady and almost conversational, addressed to me across the living room with the directness of a board meeting. "Every piece of it. The lawyer, the FBI, the recordings." Her chin lifted slightly. "While you were lying in that hospital bed, letting us believe—" "Yes," I said. "While I was lying in that hospital bed." She absorbed that. Something moved behind her eyes, fast, complicated, and then was gone. "People will say you humiliated your own daughter," she said, "in front of everyone she knows." "People," I said, "can look at the evidence and decide for themselves." Briggs reappeared in the garden doorway alone, now his hands free, his expression professionally neutral. He crossed to Diana and stopped at a respectful distance. "Ms. Calloway," he said, "our investigation into your specific involvement is ongoing. I'm not placing you under arrest at this time." He paused, letting that land before he continued. "However, I need you to understand clearly that you are not to leave the state of California. If you attempt to do so, that changes. Do you understand?" Diana looked at Briggs the way she had always looked at obstacles, with the assessing eye of someone already calculating the way around them. "I understand," she said. Briggs held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded once and stepped back. Pastor Gerald Moore moved through the crowd toward me, not quickly, but with the steady, deliberate pace of a man who has decided what needs to be said and intends to say it. He stopped in front of me and put his hand briefly on my arm, and his eyes were full of something that was equal parts grief and apology. "I was told you asked for me personally," he said quietly. "I should have called you to confirm." "You came because someone said they needed you," I said. "That's not something you apologize for, Gerald." He pressed my arm once. Then he turned and walked back through the crowd, which parted for him with the instinctive deference people show to men who carry a certain kind of quiet weight. Diana picked up her bag from the chair where she had left it at the beginning of the afternoon. The same chair, the same bag. The world entirely different from when she had set it down. She smoothed her dress once with both hands. She looked around the room one more time at the faces of 200 people she had gathered here as witnesses to her version of the future, and she let herself see fully and without flinching what those faces were showing her now. Then she looked at me. "I needed it to be mine," she said. Her voice had dropped to something almost private, as if the 200 people had ceased to exist, and it was just the two of us in the living room, the way it had been when she was small and came to find me late at night and sat on the arm of the leather chair while I read. "I know that doesn't explain it. I know it doesn't." Her voice tightened. Her jaw worked. For one moment, just one something genuinely human moved across her face, raw and unmanaged and achingly familiar. Then it was gone. "I know," I said quietly. And I did. That was the part nobody tells you about betrayal, that understanding it doesn't make it hurt less. It just means you're standing in the wreckage with your eyes open. Diana nodded once. Then she walked to the front door, opened it herself, and stepped through without looking back. The sound of her heels on the front steps, then the walkway, then gone. Nora appeared at my elbow. She didn't say anything. She simply stood close enough that her shoulder pressed against mine, and I felt the warmth of her through the fabric of my suit jacket. And I stood there in the center of my own living room, surrounded by people who had come to watch me disappear, and instead were watching something else entirely. Calvin caught my eye from across the room. He raised his glass of water, still the same glass, still untouched, and dipped his chin. I dipped mine back. The last guests left at 2:30 in the afternoon. They went quietly. Most of them coats retrieved from the guest room. Brief words pressed into my hand at the door. The particular subdued quality of people who have witnessed something they will be processing for a long time and don't yet have the language for it. Barbara Holloway hugged me without saying anything, which was more useful than most of what people say in moments like this. The Meridian Properties team left together in a group, their expressions carrying the specific discomfort of people who had been introduced to Marcus Webb as their future partner approximately 40 minutes before watching him get handcuffed in a living room. When the door closed behind the last of them, the house settled into a silence that felt entirely different from the silence of an empty house. This silence had texture. It had the white lilies still standing in their vases, the half-eaten trays of food from the Sunset Caterer, the slideshow still running on the television, until Patricia closed her laptop and the screen went dark. I sat down in the leather armchair in the corner of the living room. I had been on my feet for nearly 2 hours. My body registered this with considerable feeling. Nora sat on the couch nearest me. Calvin took a chair near the fireplace. Raymond stood near the window. Patricia set her briefcase on the dining table and remained standing, because Patricia was not a woman who sat down when there was still work to discuss. Marcus Webb will be arraigned Monday morning in federal court, she said. Given the scope of the financial crimes and his involvement with the larger network, the FBI has been investigating. The U.S. Attorney's Office is seeking a sentence in the range of 9 years. He has already indicated through his attorney a willingness to cooperate with the broader investigation in exchange for consideration at sentencing. She paused. The cooperation won't help him much. The evidence is substantial. And Diana, Nora asked. The FBI investigation into Diana's involvement is active. The secondary authorization codes on the transfers, the conservatorship documentation, the communications with Marcus's shell company, it's significant. Patricia chose her next words carefully. I expect charges within 60 days. What those charges look like will depend on how cooperative she chooses to be. She looked at me. Regardless of the criminal process, her removal from Callaway Construction is permanent. The no contest clause in the trust means any legal challenge she files results in the forfeiture of everything the trust would have given her. Her attorneys will advise her not to file. Calvin leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. What happens to the company Monday morning? You do, I said. He looked at me. You've been running it for 3 days already, I said. Keep running it. Calvin pressed his lips together hard. His eyes went bright, and he looked at the fireplace for a moment, jaw working before he trusted himself to speak. I won't let you down, he said. His voice came out rough at the edges. Calvin. I held his gaze. You never have. Patricia gathered her folders. I'll be in touch Monday about the remaining filings. She snapped her briefcase closed and looked at me over her glasses, with the expression she reserved for moments when she was going to say something true and slightly uncomfortable. Arthur, get some rest. You're still recovering from a serious infection, and you just spent 2 hours standing in your living room conducting what I can only describe as the most effectively staged legal intervention I have witnessed in 30 years of practice. Nora made a sound that was almost a laugh. I'll sleep, I said. After Patricia left, the 4 of us, Raymond, Nora, Calvin, and I sat in the quiet of the living room while the October afternoon light moved slowly across the floor. Nobody rushed to fill the space. There was something almost restful about it after the week we had all just come through. Raymond stood eventually and began moving through the room, collecting glasses, folding napkins, doing the small, practical things he had always done without being asked. He paused near the dining table where the framed photographs from the slideshow were still propped against the wall, waiting to be removed. What do you want me to do with these? He asked. I looked at them. Diana and me at Christmas. Diana and me in Napa. Diana and me at the company event, both of us squinting into the sun the year before any of this had started. Put them away, I said. Somewhere. Not thrown away. Just somewhere. Raymond nodded. He understood the distinction. I looked toward the corner of the room where Helen's photograph sat on the small writing desk. The one Diana had not touched. The one that showed Helen standing in the garden in the summer of 2009, laughing at something off camera with her whole face the way she always laughed. Leave Helen's where it is, I said. Raymond looked at it. Yes, sir, he said quietly. Nora reached over and put her hand on mine. I turned my hand over and held hers, and we sat like that in the afternoon light, while Raymond moved quietly through the room, and Calvin stared at the cold fireplace with the expression of a man already thinking about Monday morning, and the white lilies stood in their vases, and the house settled around us like something exhaling after a very long time of holding its breath. Spring came to Los Angeles the way it always does, not with drama, but with a gradual insistence. The jacaranda trees along Bellagio Road turning purple almost overnight, the morning air carrying something warmer and lighter than it had in months. Marcus Webb was sentenced in February. 9 years in federal prison with credit for his cooperation in dismantling 3 additional nodes of the financial network the FBI had been mapping since the previous spring. His attorney called it a good outcome. I didn't follow the coverage closely. Some things you don't need to watch to know they're finished. Diana withdrew her legal challenges in March. All of them, the trust contest, the asset claims, the complaint she had filed with the California State Bar against Patricia. She received what the trust had always provided for her determined, before any of this began, back when I still believed I was building something to leave to someone who wanted it for the right reasons. It was enough to live on. It was not enough to undo what she had done. I didn't hear from her. Calvin's first full quarter as CEO closed with the strongest numbers Callaway Construction had posted in 6 years. He called me on a Tuesday morning to tell me, and his voice had the particular quality of a man who has been given a responsibility he takes seriously and has discovered to his own relief that he is equal to it. I told him Helen would have been pleased. He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and then he said, "I'm going to try to be worthy of that Mr. Callaway." And I believed him completely. The Helen Callaway Educational Foundation awarded its first 12 scholarships in April. The ceremony was held on a Saturday morning at Cal State Los Angeles, in a room full of young people who were going to build things, and I sat in the 3rd row and watched their names being called and thought about a woman who had believed without reservation or condition that the things you build outlast everything else. She was right. She was almost always right. On the first Saturday of April, I walked out to the garage at 7 in the morning. The Mustang was exactly where it had always been, midnight blue, under the fluorescent light, cream leather seats that Helen had chosen, because she said they looked happier than black. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at it the way you look at something you have been avoiding because you were afraid of what you would feel. What I felt was simpler than I expected. It felt like coming home. I took the keys from the hook on the wall. I sat down behind the wheel. The seat remembered me, or I remembered it. The angle of the back, the particular give of the leather, the way the steering wheel sat in my hands, like something designed specifically for them. Raymond opened the passenger door and got in without being asked, because Raymond had never needed to be asked. I started the engine. It caught on the first try, a sound like a conversation, resuming after a long pause, steady and certain, and completely itself. I sat with my hands on the wheel and listened to it for a moment, and something that had been wound tight in my chest for a very long time released slowly, like a cable finally given slack. "Where to?" Raymond asked. I looked at the open garage door. The April morning beyond it. The jacaranda petals on the driveway, purple against the gray concrete, the kind of small, beautiful thing that Los Angeles produces without effort and without apology. Helen used to say the coast road was best in the morning, I said. Raymond reached for his seatbelt. She was right about most things. She was right about all of it, I said. I put the Mustang in reverse and backed out into the April sun. I have spent 65 years building things with my own hands, buildings, contracts, a company, a life. And in all that time, the most important thing I ever built was trust. What I failed to build was the wisdom to see when that trust was being taken apart from the inside. Every family drama, revenge begins not with a villain, but with a trust that was never truly earned. If there is one thing I want you to take from this family, stories fun, it is this: do not wait until you are lying in a hospital bed to see clearly who is sitting beside you. I waited too long. Do not make my mistake. God has a way of putting the right people in your life exactly when you need them most. Raymond was mine. Find yours. Because in every family drama revenge, there is always a Raymond, someone who shows up with muddy boots and no questions asked. The truth about family drama revenge is that it never looks like the movies. And the healing after family stories. Revenge looks like a coast road on an April morning, with 40 years of love riding quietly in the passenger seat. That is what remains after family stories, revenge, not the betrayal. The people who stayed. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done differently. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. A gentle note. Some stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted to illuminate deeper human truths. Names and places are coincidental, but what this story teaches you belongs to you.